Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wildlife Inspired. Today we're doing a 10 images show, and I've got a special guest that I know you're going to love. His work is phenomenal. He's a macro photographer. His name is Thomas Barbin, and we're going to get to his 10 images right after this. When I took this, I just wanted the head, the eye, the bill to be all sharp, and then the rest just to like melt away.
The thing I have to say with ducks is it's hard to get creative with ducks or waterfowl in general.
Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So, just real quick, I want to tell people a little bit. I always try to introduce why somebody's on the show, why I chose them, and what it was about their work. So, a few years ago, I was, kind of getting some things in my Instagram feed, and these images came up, and they were I just stopped. I was like, wow, that is amazing. Now, I'm glad because in his 10 images, Thomas picked one of my favorite all-time images and probably the series of images that really got my attention and got me following him. So I'm just really excited. By the way, Thomas, I think you're the first macro photographer we've had, a dedicated macro photographer. I know you do some birds. I know you do some other stuff, but I'm going to say dedicated macro photographer. Matt Sullivan has been on the show. He does a lot of herping, a lot of snake stuff. Also very talented. I would consider him maybe a macro photographer. I don't know what genre he puts himself in, but he's kind of boxless. He does a lot of things. So if you haven't seen the episode with Matt Sullivan, for those watching this episode, you might be interested in that as well because he's done a lot of great stuff. So before we get to your 10 images, Thomas, just real quick, just a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do. I know this is not a full-time, you're not a full-time professional wildlife photographer, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Thomas Barbin. I guess I would consider myself a naturalist and nature photographer, and I enjoy all types of photography. Actually started out with bird photography, but now I definitely specialize in macro. That's probably like 95% of my photography now. I'm located in British Columbia in Canada on southern Vancouver Island on unceded Wasanich and Lekwungen territory. I'm not a full-time photographer. This is just sort of like my hobby, kind of do it in most of my spare time. I'm actually a high school teacher working as a teacher on call, or most people are more familiar with that as like a substitute teacher. So I kind of come in if your teacher gets sick or has a meeting or something. And yeah, I also have a nice little family. I've got a wife and a young son. He just turned 2 in May.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually remember on social media when you put out that you were having a kid and it was your first one, how excited you were.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. So first of all, happy Father's Day to you, sir.
Thanks. You too, Scott.
All right. So without any further ado, just as this goes through, obviously ask questions. Here's kind of the format as I saw it tonight. We will go through these 10 images. And because macro photography can be pretty specialized in terms of equipment and gear, we will deal with some of that. So if you have questions about the gear or settings or things like that, I did ask Thomas to, kind of maybe show his equipment. So maybe halfway through the show, we'll get into some of the equipment that he uses as we see some of the images. But I wanted to kind of jump right in to these images. So as I do with all of these, I ask kind of why. Like, why is this one of your 10? Sometimes it's a great story. Sometimes it's just a compelling image or a really neat subject. So I put these in order, and I always save my top 2 or 3 for the end. So I'm going to start with this, and I don't know a whole lot about insects, so I apologize. I'm probably going to butcher some of these insects. I know it's a spider, but outside of that, I'm lost. So help me out with this one.
Yeah, so this one would be one that I chose more for the animal itself. It's one of my favorite genus of spiders, a genus called Habronattus. They're jumping spiders. This is probably one of the fanciest Habronattus species, Habronattus americanus. So it's one of my favorite types of groups of spiders, and one of my favorite images I've gotten within my favorite groups of spiders. And yeah, they're just so cool looking. Like, they're tiny, they're quite common, so most people like they're beach spiders. These things kind of live in like sandy beach habitat and dunes. So like people are kind of hanging out at the beach, not realizing these tiny little fancy male spiders are running around underneath them. And then this particular image is I thought was kind of interesting because, like I said, they're beach spiders where I live. They hang out at the beach. And this one I found really far away from the beach. I found it kind of in the interior of BC on the top of a limestone cliff, just rocks and stuff. Last place I would have expected to find one. I kind of just found a female hopping around and was like, oh, cool, Habronattus, because the female Habronattus all look the same. And then I found a male, and I was just like, no way, this can't be this one. It's the wrong habitat. So I guess they also like to live on cliffs too, and I was pretty shocked at that.
So just real quick, so in I guess science they would call that sexual dimorphism, and
Yeah.
is that
Yes.
the case with, again, I really don't know, with most spiders, or is this unique in that the male is real flashy and the females are kind of subdued as it is often in the bird world?
Yeah, most spiders have sexual dimorphism, but a lot of the time it's more of just size. But with the jumping spiders, they really kind of are like the bird world, where the males are really looking fancy, trying to impress the females. And this genus Habronattus take it to the point where the genus's common name is the paradise spiders, kind of named after the birds of paradise, because you get these really flashy males, and then they also have to do a little dance for the females. So in order to like when they kind of go into courtship, they wave their front legs around. Often they'll kind of shimmy their third pair of legs around, and they'll have to dance to impress the female.
That's so cool. So, yeah, I never thought about this. Like in my entire life, I've never thought about that as a possibility. And one of the things I will say, I timed this show a little bit on purpose. So for me personally, through June, I get pretty good bird activity. July and August are pretty slow months for me. You know, the breeding birds have typically done their thing and they go a little bit more quiet. They're very reserved. They're more in the scrubs. They're tending to nests. They're not showing and displaying and calling and singing and doing all the things during migration that you get that gives you good looks. So I often resort to macro photography as a secondary thing. Now I also have this native plant interest, so I've planted just a literal, like just a bunch of native plants here. So I'm out there all the time, and I'm actually carrying my macro lens with me every day now, just looking for
Awesome.
cool stuff. One of the things that's neat, and I'm sure you got that interest when you just look at all of the stuff that's around you every day that you never noticed, you never paid attention to, you think it's common, and then when you get inside their world and you just watch them and you study them, just how different it is. It really is literally like going to I mean, you can go on vacation in your flower bed because everything is different and unique.
Yeah, I used to have a rule when I was kind of starting out and I didn't really know how to look for things. And I was just like, everything was new. That if I went to a spot and started looking and I didn't see anything, I wasn't allowed to leave that spot for at least one full minute of like just looking at the ground. Because after like a minute, your eyes kind of adjust from looking at faraway things to close things.
Right.
And you'll kind of come to a spot and be like, there's nothing here. And if you force yourself to stay for a full minute, you realize like, no, there's a lot of things here.
Yeah.
And a lot of weird things too.
So a question already came up before we get to the next image. Do you use manual focusing all the time for macro, or is it even possible to use autofocus?
Yeah, definitely manual focus. So you get the focus to the magnification you want, so kind of like how close you want to be, and then you're moving the camera. And in this case, like I like to hold the object that the spider's on. So the spider's on a stick. I'm holding the stick in one hand, camera in the other, and I could show this technique now or later if anyone's interested. And you just move the camera closer or further depending on where you want the focus to be. You can use autofocus if you have it to initially get to how close you want to be, but once you're kind of there, there's no way you're going to be able to use autofocus to track a spider.
Okay. All right. Yeah, let's get to a couple more images. I'm actually very curious to see that. So I would love to see that setup. So be on standby with that because I am kind of curious. I find when I've done this at a very amateurish level, I'm same thing. I'm locked in on one focal plane, and I actually, since I handhold and use natural light, I kind of just like shoot bursts, and I like burst
Yeah.
towards it, and then I kind of burst away, and then I look back and pray that one of them is in focus. And normally, because I'm not using flash usually. I do use flash sometimes, but yeah, I find that the focal plane is just so shallow. Like you're talking about like not even a millimeter sometimes, right? Like it's got to be like microns.
Yeah. And if you're not shooting flash, that's the way to do it. Just lay down the shutter and slowly kind of rock in,
Yes.
slowly rock out, and
Okay.
you'll probably hit where you want.
All right. Well, so I'm doing. All right. So I feel better that I'm doing it kind of the right way. All right. Let's
Yeah.
get on to this millipede, right?
Yeah. So this one, I don't even really care for the photo itself. I just think that the subject's super interesting. So this one, we were on a backpacking trip in a provincial park at the north end of the Vancouver Island called Cape Scott. And it's kind of a really, really wet coastal rainforest. And just in the middle of the trail, there was this millipede sauntering across the trail, and it was just like it was unusually slow. And these millipedes are so common, like you see tons of them. The only thing is they're not blue. They're supposed to be jet black with yellow dots, not blue with yellow dots. So right away you could tell something was weird. First it was like moving so slow, and it just is a total wrong color. So at the time I had no idea. I was like, is this a new species or what's going on with this thing? Is it a mutation? So we got some shots of it, put it up on iNaturalist, and this virus expert took a look at it, and he told me, or he kind of realized what was going on, is that this is a millipede infected by a virus called an iridovirus.
I'm here.
And yeah, iridoviruses are kind of fairly well known in woodlouse. Like they're not common, they're really rare, but they're still like fairly well known. They're well documented. But this is the first ever instance of an iridovirus in a millipede. There's never, at least as far as this guy knows and anything on in the academia, there's never been record of a iridovirus in the millipede.
So you're literally a celebrity.
I'm a celebrity to maybe 3 people. Yeah, no, probably not. Yeah, so he actually ended up citing this image in his paper because he wrote a paper about kind of some weird iridovirus finds. But then what's happening with the iridovirus, which gives it the color, is that the virus accumulates in the host tissues. So it just like there's a ton of virus in this host tissue. And the virus has this really weird shape. And I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's like a 20-sided shape. And when you get all these iridoviruses lined up together, they create like a lattice. And that lattice work creates the iridescent, usually blue color. So it reflects, or kind of, reflects the light back in this weird blue color.
That's seriously amazing.
Yeah, it blew my mind when I kind of read about it.
Yeah, seriously amazing. So yeah, I was wondering because I've never seen a millipede. So I just figured it was a species, a blue species that was rare, and you came across it, and it was like kind of cool to look at. You think about this sometimes with like those ocean kind of like creatures that have that weird iridescence to them, or it almost feels like this is underwater or something. Like it's got that kind of vibe to it.
I guess it looks very wet and oceanic blue.
Yeah. Super
super
cool.
At the time I was like, is it another species? Like I thought it had kind of the local yellow, they call it the yellow spotted millipede or cyanide millipede because it has cyanide in it as a defense mechanism. So I was like, I thought I had them down, but then this thing came across and kind of threw me for a loop.
Very cool. A question did come up, and I'd have to bring this up. When you're using macro photography in general, do you use back button focus?
I don't use any focus.
What? But if you did,
I use back button for birds.
You back button, yes?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. All right. Well, I'm losing bad. It gets worse every week. All right, I got to put you in here as a back button guy. Hold on. I do this with every guest, and we're down to a very slim minority. You know, it's funny. I had somebody send me. Actually, I don't know if he's on the show, but his name's John Davis. He's a good photographer. He does raptors out in California. Yeah, we're getting our butts kicked here.
You know who I heard does not back button is on his YouTube videos. I think Glenn Bartley does.
I will literally just book people who don't use back button focus.
Yeah, I think that Glenn Bartley doesn't do back
button. All right, I'm writing the name down. I may have to message him after the show because I gotta stack the numbers.
Saw it on a YouTube video and I was shocked. I was like,
so this guy sent me a Sony, and he's like, "You got to try the Sony mirrorless systems." He's like, "Forget Nikon, like go to Sony." So I get the thing, and I'm like, "Camera's broken, right?" Like I'm hitting the button, there's no focus, and then I
Yeah.
realized, of course, it's back button focus. So then I had to like figure out how the buttons are configured because I didn't configure the camera, he did, but I think I got it figured out. I actually took it out this morning for a test run. I'm going to do a video on that actually, and just my experience with this Sony that's back there versus my Nikon mirrorless system. Take me through this now.
Okay.
First of all, the start with the background because it
Uh,
actually looks like a man-made background. Is that a man-made synthetic
no,
background?
this is just a really cool leaf. This is a
Okay.
leaf that I found it on. Yeah. Um, yeah, this is a weird one. So I chose this. Again, not necessarily my favorite photo, but it's, I think, by far the weirdest thing I've ever found. And this was in Costa Rica, and it's a caterpillar. It's called a monkey slug moth, and it's the caterpillar of the monkey slug moth.
It looks like a slug.
Yeah, it's kind of a bizarre one. I think Phobotron is the genus, and it's really hard to find information on the species because someone on iNaturalist brought this right to species, and there was like nothing other than like the host plant and like a very general range of it. But there's a closely related species that I guess does have some more life history info on, and I was reading there that apparently these things are supposed to be mimics of tarantula molts. And
Okay.
this one, it's a bit of a stretch, but I've seen the later forms of this one. Like on iNaturalist, I've searched up the species, and you can see like later molts of this caterpillar, and they're a lot furrier, and you can kind of see like, okay, that could be like a tarantula molt.
Yeah, that like it's just again, it's just crazy what is. And now how far from your home did you take this, by the way?
How, pardon me?
How far were you away from your home? So in other words, geographically, do you have to like is this miles away from
This
your
was
house or like relatively
this was
close?
Costa Rica.
Oh, this was Costa Rica.
Yeah,
Okay. I
this
didn't
was
hear that
Costa
first
Rica.
part. Okay.
I think that these things, they go like another species goes up to maybe Florida.
Okay.
They don't really go too far into North America.
So
Apparently,
when you're going to a destination like that, do you have a checklist or is it just kind of like there's so much down there, it's just we're just gonna find stuff?
so much down there. And my
Yeah.
wife at the time like surprised me. She's just like, "Do you want to go to Costa Rica in like 2 weeks?" And I was
Oh.
like, "Yes, I do." So I didn't even have time to research. Like, yeah, I didn't even know what things to look out for or what to not stick your camera into. And
Did
yeah, it's just like a kid in a candy store.
did you have a guide for that or was it just go out and find stuff?
No, just go find stuff. Kind of message a few people, ask for like tips for spots, and yeah, a couple, like I asked for bird info because at the time I was still really into bird photography. I wanted to see a quetzal, and so I got a few tips for that. But for macro, it's just sort of like just start looking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome. All right. Now I know what this is because we had a brief conversation about this. I thought it was a fly, but you actually corrected me and you said this is what?
this is a dragonfly. I think it's called an ocellated dragonfly. I don't know too much about dragonflies. They fly too much, so I I have a hard time taking photos of them. But this one was hanging from some wooden steps. This is in the same park as that millipede,
Okay.
and we were on our way back, just kind of like dead tired from I think it was a 4 night, maybe it was a 3 night trip, and there was this dragonfly just like hanging from these wet wooden steps, and it was on the very bottom step, so it was really low. And I almost didn't take a photo of it because I was wearing a backpack that was like too heavy and fit way too small, and it was like way at the bottom step. And then my friend took a photo of it, so I was like, okay, I guess I have to take a photo of it too. And I would just kind of go down there and try and like somehow fit my camera between these steps. And when I'd bend over, I wouldn't be able to breathe, and I'd like start to kind of lose my vision because I was just like being squeezed by this really tiny backpack that I shouldn't have been wearing. So I just kind of go in, get a couple photos, and then when I like couldn't breathe, I'd like stand up and try and get feeling in my arms again. And I just thought nothing of it. I was like, I won't get any photos of that. Just like throw it up on iNaturalist, like a record that there's that dragonfly there. But then it turned out that this photo worked out. Yeah, I
So
just liked it.
yeah, there's a couple things I wanted to mention. First of all, you mentioned iNaturalist a few times, and for those that don't know what that is, it's a citizen science kind of community where you can identify and upload, but it also is interactive so that people can actually answer questions. And it's a great way for people to log data. So even if you're out in the woods, and it's not just insects, I actually use it for plants. So you can document much the same way my bird photography friends would use eBird. It's very similar. So if you were putting those two together, it's probably I think it sounds like it's the largest collection or community for both insects and for plants. I think eBird is probably a much bigger community and better tracking for birds themselves. But really, anything can go into I think can go into iNaturalist. So it's an
Yeah,
app that you can get on your phone.
anything that's not cultivated is
Yep.
like good for iNaturalist. Invasive is super good for invasive tracking. Sometimes you can find weird things and increase the known range of stuff. And a lot of scientists now are like using it when they're looking at distribution data
Yep.
of organisms. So it's a really cool way. Like when I found it, I was kind of feeling like I wanted to do more with my photography. It was like, sure, I'm showing people things they wouldn't have seen before, but what am I really contributing? And iNaturalist kind of filled that void of like, how can I actually contribute to something with my photos?
Great.
And yeah, and then people tell you what things are, and sometimes it's like an undescribed species or a new kind of location for one, and it's really cool.
Yeah. So one of the things I'll point out, and you're going to see this through Thomas's work, and it's one of the things I really appreciate about it. But look, when you look at these last, none of these images necessarily feel identical, and I think it's kind of interesting. I'm going to go to the next one real quick, but none, certain people develop a style that is very much to that person. So you look at it and you're like, I know exactly who that is. Other people have this tremendous range, so it's kind of like being able to play a lot of musical instruments. So I think you've done a really nice job with your portfolio as you look through, and I would encourage you just to go through Thomas's Instagram account, but look at the diversity, the breadths of both species and types, but also just the styles of photography. Some super, super detailed. Let me get back to this one for a second, because one of the things that I'm challenged with when I try things like this is just getting the right depth of field. And so normally what I can get on a round object like these eyes is you'll get the front. Is there a name for that pattern in the eyes, by the way?
They're compound eyes.
So it's just compound eyes. So
Yeah, I
you
think
can,
if I understand you correctly, I think so.
yep. Yeah. So how there's like these little tiny dots that go all through the eyes everywhere. Um,
Yeah, compound eyes.
and sometimes you can get them in focus in the front, but not in the back. Now, I think this is probably the best example of a technique called photo stacking that people may have heard of or may not have heard of. So photo stacking basically just means you take multiple exposures. I don't, you know better than me, but it seems like it's somewhere between 10 and 30, but who knows the right number or the amount that some people go to. And then you put them through a program that normally will take the sharpest pieces of each slice and put them together. Generally, to do that, you need some equipment, and it's a little bit more controlled. So in other words, you would put it on a slider, a little rail, you dial it in a little bit, you dial it in, you dial it in, you take all these frames and then you put them together. Did I get that close to right?
Yeah, except for like the monkey slug caterpillar is like 3 photos, but
Okay.
I'll do all my stacking handheld. Like I just try and keep things steady, and usually it doesn't work, but sometimes it
Okay.
does.
Okay, that's good to
But
know.
that dragonfly is a single photo.
Okay. So when you get a single photo that's got the depth there, that's got enough, so do you just stop it way down to like f16 or something like that? And you may not know this exact photo, but in general?
I don't go above f11. This is just you can kind of work with the focal plane, so you kind of like work with what angle relative to the subject you want your camera to be and what areas do you want to look and focus. Like if you really look up front, like the top bit's out of focus, but there's enough detail that you can kind of see what's there.
Hmm.
And with compound eyes, it can be tricky. Usually I yeah, sometimes you can get away with like losing a little, like having a bit of the top of the compound eye out of focus and not really have it noticeable to get kind of like the middle in focus. Or you can just get the top in focus, which looks cool, but then you don't get any of the rest of the subject. So you kind of just work with like the angle of your camera relative to your subject and try and like lay that. If you almost imagine like your focal plane as like a piece of paper and try and lay your piece of paper so that as many points of the subject that you want are touching that piece of paper, that'll look in focus.
Okay.
So you can kind of like almost play with your depth of field and
Yeah.
sometimes get away with looking like you have more than you actually do.
Okay. All right. Good to know. All right. We got to talk more after this because I got to learn more. Like I said, July and August are my months for macro photography. So they're coming up. I think I will do a couple more birds locally, but I've shot the heck out of the birds around here. So I'm just looking to kind of broaden my horizons. So why did you choose this image? This is much different than the other images.
This one's just fancy looking. That's really all. That's the only reason. And people seem to like it.
Yeah.
So I was actually really close to cutting this one. And then I was like, oh no, it's pretty fancy. And this one is a hefty focus stack. I wrote down how many pictures it is. How many pictures did I do on this one? 13 images.
Okay.
This one's 13 photos. So I just started at the front end of the beetle and just as steadily as I could worked my way back.
And you did this handheld.
Handheld, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen people do focus stacking, and we had a brief conversation about that with insects. And sometimes so the subject, generally speaking, has to be very still. So a beetle might, might just sit there for a long time. But if somebody's working with a butterfly or a dragonfly to get, a precise focus stack, they may have to immobilize that subject. So I've heard people, and you can tell me if this is true or not, that they'll actually try to slow down their metabolism by freezing them or waiting till it's colder and the bugs kind of just stop moving. Is that kind of accurate in terms of their behavior?
Yeah, like all of that is true. So I guess we have to kind of briefly mention endothermy versus exothermy. And forgive me if like you already know this and this is basic, but some viewers may be useful information. But you've probably heard of like cold-blooded versus warm-blooded, right? And like humans are warm-blooded, insects are cold-blooded. And what that has to do is endothermy versus exothermy. So as humans, we're endothermic, which means we get our body temperature from our internal organs. Our metabolism is what keeps us warm and keeps us working. Whereas insects are exotherms, which means they get their body temperature from their external environment. So if it's warm, they can be warm and active, but if it's cold out, they just shut down and their metabolism tanks and they really just become motionless. So you can achieve this a couple of ways. So some people choose to put things in the fridge, and that's quite a controversial subject. Won't go too far into that. One method that I really like is if you just wait for it to happen naturally, because when the sun starts to set, the temperature cools down and the insects start to shut down. And usually they'll try and find a spot to hide away, but sometimes you can find where they're hiding, or in later cases, which we'll see with a couple of images, they choose very conspicuous areas to kind of shut down for the night. So yeah, this beetle was found right as kind of the sun was going down. At least it had set at my place. So it really cooled down, and this beetle, it started to move after a while because I was sticking my camera in its face and kind of like holding the stick that it was on, and I actually encouraged it onto a different stick. But after it kind of hadn't been bothered for a minute, it would just sit still there, and I could do this focus stack without it moving.
Pretty interesting stuff. And you also do you collect specimens as well. So you don't just photograph. I mean, you're a little bit of a scientist, right? Like you're doing some of this gathering and collecting and
I've
doing
been doing a lot with spiders, so I've
Mhm.
been working with a few folks at the local museum to document spider diversity. So they're kind of trying to figure out what species of spiders can you identify through photos, because the traditional method is you have to kill them, you have to examine their morphology under a scope, look at their reproductive structures up close. But for quite a few species, and it's not possible with all, there's certainly probably way more that you have to kill than you can do with a photo, but there's definitely species you can figure out just through their color pattern or external morphologies that you can see with a camera. So we're trying to figure out which ones you can. So what we're doing is I'll take a photo of a spider, and I'll try and kind of get a shot from the top. I'll try and get a shot of the eyes. And then unfortunately you have to kill it after. And then you'll bring it to the entomologist. They'll confirm the ID with absolute certainty. And then you have a record where you have a photo where you 100% know the identity of, and you can start to compare them and see, like, can you tell the species apart just through a photo, or are they too similar that you still have to kill and collect them all?
And when
So
you're
sort
talking,
of
Go ahead.
birds started out that way because they used to not know how to ID birds without killing them. They'd
Hmm.
like shoot them down, like bird surveys, they'd hunt them and they'd look at the skins. And then eventually they got a field guide that you could actually ID in the field. So we're trying to see what you can do with spiders.
Great. And yeah, I think like it's really interesting when you look at species. So when with birds, we think there's a lot of species, and then you look at insects. I mean, there are some because I'll take a picture, and of course I want to know what I'm taking a picture of, so I'll go on and I'll try to figure out what it is. And in those genuses, sometimes there's like hundreds and hundreds of species just in that one genus, and that's just North America. Then you go to like South America or Asia or Europe, and that genus is in every country with hundreds of other species. It's mind blowing how many insect species there are.
Yeah, it's amazing how they're kind of figuring out how to tell them apart too. Like a lot of wasps, the tiny, tiny wasps, they're literally identical. And they've, like, I don't know how people figure this out, but there's some wasps that to tell the species apart, they look at the iridescence in their wings and they have like different iridescent patterns in their wings because otherwise they're like absolutely identical. Even like their genitalia are identical. Normally you're like, oh, at least you could look at a male and kind of lock and key, find like, oh, that's that distinct male versus that species. And some of the wasps, you can't even do that. So they like look at their wing patterns when they iridesce like UV light.
Yeah. Well, speaking of weird looking stuff, what am I looking at? Is this a bee or a fly or
Yeah,
it's crazy
this,
looking?
this, this one's weird. It's a fly. They're in a group called the thick-headed flies. The genus is Myopa. Someone actually did give me a species name here. I wrote it down. Oh, I didn't write it down. Um, but they're bizarre because one, they just look so cool. And this is like I think 6 or 7 photos stacked. It was
Okay.
early morning, the sun hadn't hit it, so it stayed still for me. But they're so bizarre, and I've only ever seen one of them. I've always wanted to see more, and I've only ever seen one this one time in a spot that I look very frequently. So they're kind of like mysterious to me, and that I've only seen the one before. And I kind of think that they look like dogs. I just think like the posture of it is very dog-like.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
then
it looks
like
like
for
it's
a lot,
smiling too. Like it looks kind of
yeah,
happy, but you told me earlier this is not a happy critter.
no, they're brutal. And a lot of like when you're taking photos of these things, you often have no idea what they are until later. So threw it up on iNaturalist just as like, hey, this is a fly, and then you get the experts coming in and telling you the species, and you can read more about it. So I was reading about this one after, and I was amazed. They're parasitoids. So parasitoids are parasites that always kill their host, and they're parasitoids of bees. This one I think is specific on mining bees, so the Andrena genus. And they have an interesting way of getting their hosts. They actually intercept the bees in flight, and then they have an abdomen, and I don't have photos of it. I wish I did, but I had no idea at the time. Their abdomen, like where it's kind of tucked under there at the back under the wing, is actually like kind of like a can opener. And they'll intercept the bee in the air, and then they'll use their can opener abdomen to pry open the body segments of the bee's abdomen. So you can kind of see on the abdomen at the back of that fly, there's like overlapping looking plates. So bees have that too, and they'll actually pry them open and lay a harpoon-shaped egg inside of the bee's abdomen. And then I guess like not much is known past that, but they must kind of hatch out and the larvae feed on the inside of the bee
Oh.
and ultimately kill it.
Yeah, and that's not you hear all these weird stories about insects that's their reproductive cycle is finding a host and they
Yeah.
inject the egg and then the egg basically eats from the inside out. I think it happens in some caterpillars too where there's they get that same kind of they become the host for other things.
Yeah, there's like endless insects that are using caterpillars as their hosts. And
Yeah.
those are called endoparasitoids. So they lay their eggs inside. There's also just as many that are exo that'll just like lay their egg on top, and then the egg will hatch out and just eat them from the outside.
Yeah, and I think I've seen pictures of caterpillars and they're all on their back, these little white little nymphs, I guess, that are just growing all on the back of the caterpillars.
Yeah, those are probably the pupae. So like after the larvae have gotten full, they'll kind of like make their version of a cocoon, and then they'll like sometimes burst out of the host as a cocoon, and then an adult will kind of hatch out of that cocoon.
Yeah, it's so cool. I had somebody reach out to me this week about macro photography and asking some questions about it and, looking at a lens and stuff like that. We're kind of in the home stretch with images. Do you want to show us your setup real quick and kind of how you go about that? I have a couple while you're
Yeah.
grabbing that. I noticed on your Instagram, I'm going to pull this up real quick. These are a couple of Thomas's images. So you can go to his Instagram account, by the way, under his stories. He actually shows you some of these. And I'm sure that it evolves, right? Just like everything, like the diffuser evolves, the number of flashes evolve. So everything kind of changes. This is a different setup. This uses 2 flashes, but you'll notice there's like this big panel on all of them. And I've seen that on a lot of macro photographers. Is that a diffuser or is that to kill external light like sunlight and kind of put shade onto the subject?
I use it for both.
Okay.
You
Sorry, that was a personal one.
I use it for both. So its function as a diffuser, but it also indirectly also can shade the subject. Because my goal when I'm taking photos, because I'm using flash almost exclusively, is I want to have the subject in the shade. So the only light on the subject is the light that I create. And then I love when the background is light, like lit with natural light. So ideally I'm lighting the subject. Natural light is lighting the background. You don't always get the natural light in the background, but that's what I strive for.
Yep.
So that's the setup I'm using now. It's very similar to what's in the story. I can't really, there we go. So I have an old 7D Mark II, probably will die one day soon. On the front here is that big screen, or maybe I should start from the back. So 7D Mark II. I've got the Laowa 100mm lens. This is a cool one because it goes to 2 times magnification, whereas most macro lenses stop at 1 times magnification. So you can kind of go like twice life size. And then that's often not enough. So I have this clip-on lens thing. This just goes onto the front. It's a Rain-X clip-on lens. And it adds, so I'm trying to copy myself like in mirror mode to figure where I'm going. So this clips onto the front, adds another like, I don't know, maybe it makes sense if it's like another 2 times magnification. So you get even more out of this. Not too much image quality degradation. You lose infinity focus though, which is unfortunate. So I've kind of copied my friend and made a little Velcro thing. I can tuck it away if something's far away or too big. But that almost always lives up front there.
So just real quick, give us a breakdown on what it would cost for that lens. So what is a macro lens cost?
This one is what is this? It's about $700 Canadian.
Okay.
It might be more like $550.
So that's like $2.50 US, right?
Yeah.
Like,
so it's a lot cheaper if you're American. And yes, and then the camera itself, I guess most of the reviewers probably are like bird photographers, 7D Mark II. I just bought it used off a friend. It was almost dying when he had it, so I got it for $400. This little clip-on lens, it is I think it's just over 100 Canadian, so It's not too much, and it's actually really well built. I was surprised that doesn't really affect the image quality too much. And then my flash is a double flash head thing. It's the Laowa KX800. It's like 2 flash heads, and they're bendy, so you can kind of move them. And that flash, I think, is like 300 something American.
Okay.
And I've built these little soft boxes, so I'd use like a duotang cover for the support, black tape just so it doesn't look too ugly. And then on the inside, I'm trying. There's this guy. I don't know if you've heard of Dallin Tech. I think his name is John Kimbler.
Okay.
He's really good with bees, but he like swears by this quarter stop China silk. So I'm trying that out, and it seems all right. And that'll have 4 layers of that. So like the flash head's here, and then it goes through 4 layers of this China silk to kind of. The goal is to spread the light out as much as I can.
Yep.
And then on top of the lens here is a final layer diffusion. It's like a opaque or translucent duotang cover. And then on the front, I just have Bounty paper towel. I've tried a lot of different things, but Bounty paper towel seems to be a nice, I don't know, I just like the light quality from the Bounty.
It's so fun to watch macro photographers build their little kits because they're so proud of their ingenious different like methods of doing it, and everybody's has the same principles, which is light diffusion and then some kind of like shield that also diffuses it. So it seems like those are the key principles. But if you go on YouTube, there's dozens and dozens of videos about people's macro setups, and It's quite clever. So I wanted people to see that just so they kind of see what it's like. It's not you when you hear people say flash, when you're that close to a
Yeah.
subject with a bare flash, it's quite bright and you get very, very bright. It's very noticeable that it's a flash. Yours,
Yeah.
like when you look at this, you can see just how soft that diffused light is. And the advantage for flash with macro seems to be that you can use a little bit higher shutter speed and get much. You can go down, like you said, f11 or even f14 if you wanted, but the flash is going to provide as much light as you really need as long as it's diffused and looks soft. I think you get this really nice aesthetic. I love the fact that you mentioned natural light in the background, because what you'll often see with strong flash is a black background, and that's a style. You'll see a
Yeah.
lot of people that do that where it's intentional. So I tend to like things that look more natural and more environmental. And so we have a couple more images coming up that I think
Yeah. Should
really.
I show the technique for holding
Oh
them
yeah,
now, or do you?
let's do it. So I've got the spider up. So why don't
Yeah.
you show us the technique? And because is this is this an insect that you would use that technique with?
I did that technique with this one.
Perfect example.
So this
Let's go.
one, so I kind of have my setup, and I have a stick here. So with jumping spiders especially, and I've probably mentioned it again, but I learned this technique from Sean McCann, amazing macro photographer, scientist, entomologist, but he's just unreal. So, and he taught me a lot of what I know. So he kind of taught me and kind of encouraged me to like try the stick technique. So you encourage the spider or subject on a stick, but this will also work if you find something motionless on a leaf or something you just want steady. And I'll hold the stick on in my left hand, and the goal is to try and get everything to move together. Because you can imagine if you're going like this, you're going to be like shaking separately. But what you can do is you can kind of try and make everything one unit. So I'll hold my left hand out like this, palm up, and I'll try and rest the lens on the palm of my wrist, kind of somewhere around there. Then if I have the spider on the end of the lens, so this or end of the stick, I'm kind of holding it like this, and now everything's moving together. So if there's shaking in one hand, it's shaking also with the stick, and it kind of helps remove some of that motion. So then I'll just kind of try and find it through the lens, get the focus where I want it, and then just start taking photos. And then as the spider moves, you might be like moving the stick around like this. But the whole time you're trying to rest the camera on your wrist or your thumb or wherever you can get something sturdy. And if it's a leaf you're holding on a stick, like say you found a beetle on a leaf, you can do that with a leaf as well. Or if something's on a rock, you can pick up the rock and do that too. That way you can choose your backgrounds. To say you're like, oh, I want a nice bright blue sky background. You can just kind of move your whole thing up. So now the sky's the background. Maybe there's no natural light available and you don't want a black background. You can kind of find some green leaves and just move all around closer so that now your flash is also going to light up those leaves. They're not like really far away anymore. And that's a great way to choose your background and also choose the angle of whatever you're photographing.
I'm taking notes. Listen, I got to tell, like, this is the, like, people that don't watch this show, they're missing so much. Like, this is mandatory. Like, this is, like, that is great. So, what I do is if I'm holding the stick, I'm all over the place. Like, this hand's
Yeah.
shaking, this one's shaking. It's a mess.
Yeah.
So, I've
Yeah.
resorted to,
Shaking together.
yeah, I've tried to do it so that I'm just finding things like on leaves generally, like on my native plants, and I'm trying to get pictures of them. Like, obviously, I'm trying to incorporate the plant and the bug because that's kind of like my thing that I'm doing. But God, it's so difficult. And even if you try to hold the leaf or the stem, you end up shaking it more because I think it's just involuntary. Your body just naturally when it's
Yeah.
trying to stabilize something, it actually probably shakes more than if you just were naturally not doing anything.
Yeah, so if you can get that in your hand, like the leaf in your hand, and then get your cameras resting, yeah, and have everything wiggle together. It works really well in wind. Like some things, you try and do that and they fly away right away.
Yeah.
But if it's windy, sometimes you can just kind of get in there with the wind and then just kind of grab it and maybe sway a little bit and then rest it. And then that bee or whatever is on like a flower won't fly away. So sometimes that can be really helpful with windy weather too.
All right, let's get to this one. What's the species here?
This is another member of my favorite genus, Habronattus. This one is Habronattus ophrys. And again, I just kind of picked it because it's one of my favorite genus. It is one of my favorite local species within the genus, and it's like my favorite photo of that species. So this is one I'm doing. I have that technique. I have a mossy stick that I encouraged it on. I think that it might be salal leaves in the background, that there wasn't any natural light available to light up the background. So I just kind of moved that stick closer to the salal bush. So now my flash was also catching a bit of the leaves. And then, yeah, I just worked at it. It crawled around the stick, and I was able to catch a dynamic pose. And like
Love it.
90% of the shots are garbage because it's moving around. You're
Right.
trying to track it, really tricky, but it works out when it works, because then you've got kind of a dynamic moving pose of the spider.
Awesome. Let me go to this next one. This is a little different. So this is a snail. Um,
Yeah.
this feels a little bit more like wildlife photography. It almost has like more of that like bird like. So is this a different focal length than you typically use? Is it a different lens?
This is a wider lens. This is the same lens as some of the other shots coming up. It's a
Okay.
wide angle. It is a 24 millimeter lens with a 12 millimeter extension tube on it. So I'm really, really close to the snail, and I've kind of exposed for the background. So I've really dragged the shutter out. I've boosted the ISO, probably sitting around, oh, I don't know, I might be around like f13 or 14, because I'm trying to get a little bit of detail in the background. And then I'm lighting the snail with a flash. So my goal is to kind of get the background so it's lit, there's some detail in it, and then I just adjust the flash as needed to light the subject up front. And that is one of my favorite species of snails, or favorite species all around. This is the Pacific sideband. They're really common in these kind of mature forests. This is a riparian forest, so right along a nice old stream. In a park I used to work, especially with macro, because they've got their long kind of tentacle eye stalks. But I was happy that the wide angle worked out.
Yeah, it looks great. And I've seen some wide angle shots. I mentioned Derek Chanot, who was on the show. He just did a wide angle shot that I really, really liked. So as some bird photographers do these wide angle shots, they feel really, really great when you get the right environment. Wide angle to me is so
Yeah.
much more about environment. I think sometimes people use wide angle photography as like a novelty, and it doesn't always look great. I had Josh Galicki on. He's a terrific, I think the best bird photographer in the country. He has done some wide angle work that I think really works. And so when you see, and I also had Tobias Yoder on. He's done some of that, and sometimes you see it and you're like, oh, that looks so great. When it really puts that subject into this context. But environment becomes so critical, and this mossy detail becomes so critical, and having like those hints of forest in the background really gives you the sense of where it's at. So really, really, really well done. Now these next
It's
ones,
really hard because, you have to think about the background, and
yes.
most of mine don't work because I'm not a very good landscape photographer, but sometimes they do work.
So years ago, I was looking, and this was the shot that made me think. This series made me think this guy is great. Like this was, to me, this was almost mind blowing. Now I've taken one good picture of a bee in my life. I'm going to show it because I'm proud of it, and it's this
I
one.
think it's a nice photo.
It's not bad. It's not as good as your stuff, but for a guy that doesn't do it often, I did like this. And this we talked about lighting, and I did not use a flash for this. So I just wanted to mention that sometimes you can get away with other light sources. So the light is coming from the back. So notice on Thomas's image this beautiful rim light, and you can actually see the sun right on the horizon. Um, so I used a reflector for mine. You used the same flash. They would normally call this like a fill flash, but you're illuminating the front very softly and getting light from the back, and it creates a really nice effect. I do think this can be overdone, by the way, where people use a very strong flash on the front that doesn't look as pleasing. But the lighting on this one just feels absolutely perfect to me, and great job on the rim light. But this series, the next one is my favorite, but this one really got me, and I was like, man, this guy is good.
Yeah, thanks. I have to to mention Sean McCann with this one because he kind of taught me about the behavior of the bees when they do this, which I'll mention. He taught me this technique. If you want to see more of this stuff, Sean McCann has so many photos of these bees backlit, amazing wide angle photos. So he taught me kind of the technique. He taught me the location where they are and the behavior of them so that I could find them. And yeah, I probably like of the macro photographers I learned the most of, I would say he's one of the two that I learned so much of from. So I have to give him a lot of credit for this because it's very much a Sean McCann style of photo. And this is kind of me trying to emulate his style of shots. And it ended up becoming one of my favorite photos too.
Yeah. I'll put his
But
information. I'll get with you after the show. We'll add his information to the description. You've mentioned him a couple times. I'm real curious now. And I would like people to see his work. And thank you for giving credit. I think a lot of times people don't always share that credit. You know, they learn so much from other people, and sometimes they act like they invented the style. So you're
well,
very humble.
so
I know you enough to know that you're a very humble guy, and I think that's a real class act. So I'll definitely get his information in here.
and he's very much of just like wanting to share everything he knows. So it'd be rude of me to take that information and not try and pass it along so that somebody else could try photos of these because it's really fun and you get really cool results.
All right.
But basically at this beach, this is the same beach where you can find those that first red and blue spider. But there's a series of bees and wasps. This one's a bee. Their common names like the cuckoo. I think they're the cuckoo leafcutter bee. I kind of just know the genus name, Coleoxys. There's a couple other, like you'll see the next photo. There's wasps, the Ammophila wasps. There's also Prionix wasps. But for some reason, when the sun starts to set and they cool down, they don't find a very good hiding spot. Instead, they pick like really conspicuous perches. In the case of this beach, it's usually this dried up gumweed. And when it gets cold enough, they'll actually clamp their mandibles down onto the gumweed, usually on the stalk. But this one was doing it on the top of the flower head. And then they just like let go of all their legs and they just kind of rigidly hang off of the gumweed. And once they're there, they're like pretty well there. So you can kind of do that technique, hold the stem, pick your angle. So as you kind of like hold the stem and you're like, where is the sun setting? And then you expose for the sunset, make that look nice. Once the sunset looks good, then you just kind of dial in the flash to see, like you try not to overblow it, but you also want to light it a bit. You don't want to have to be bringing up the shadows a ton in post-processing. So you just kind of experiment. Once you've got the sunset ready, you're just kind of going up and down on the flash until you've kind of got the lighting you want. And this was a 24 millimeter lens with a 12 millimeter extension tube. Again, that was a setup that Sean McCann was using. He mentioned, he's like, oh yeah, this is a good lens, and I just happen to have it. So again, I learned the equipment from him as well.
And you've mentioned extension tubes a couple times. The purpose of an extension tube is to move the lens closer to the subject and effectively gain magnification.
Yeah, it puts the lens a little further from the sensor. And I guess once the lens is a little further from the sensor, you can focus closer. So that's kind of the goal of it, is you'll focus closer than you normally would be able to. Mm-hmm. And I don't really understand all the physics behind it, so I could be kind of having a bit of a misconception there, but I think that it somehow lets you focus closer. Okay. So with a 24 millimeter pancake lens for Canon, like you can already focus pretty close, but a 12 millimeter lens just gets you that little bit closer, and you can actually start to do macro with it.
Okay. Let's get to my favorite image. This is killer. This is so good.
Yeah. It's one of my favorites too.
So good. Now I can see him after you explained it. He's clamped onto this stem, right? Like yeah. I could see the mandibles here.
So this is full on. This is Ammophila. They're sand wasps, and this is full on like sleeping pose. That last Coleoxys, it had woken up because I moved it around too much, and the sun was still giving off a bit of heat, so it wasn't clamped on. It was clamped when I found it, but I kind of disturbed it. This is 15 minutes later, same spot, same night. Sun had just set a little bit more, and this Ammophila is fully asleep for the night, clamped on by its mandibles. So I was able to just kind of to line it up. I didn't get any detail in the background with this one because the sun had set quite a bit more, but I like that.
Yep.
I thought the backlighting really worked well with that dark background.
Yep.
This is another one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, and there's like a little bit of a flare here from the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one is to me is perfection. It's just absolutely gorgeous. You've got this rim light; these little hairs are all lit up. Um, super,
And
super, super.
I like how it kind of lights up the abdomen too.
Yep.
The moth will have that little bit of red
Yeah.
there, and it's bright, but you don't always notice it. Whereas the backlighting almost kind of shows that it's semi-translucent and lights it up a bit too.
Yeah, super, super, super. I've got one question for you. It says, how often do you go out and target species compared to just seeing what's around? And how often would you say you shoot? Is it once a week you get out, twice a week?
I don't do target species too much anymore, especially with iNaturalist. It's really shifted how I shoot as a photographer. I used to kind of go out just trying to get the best photos I can of what I find. So I would actually take photos. Like there'd be a lot of things I find that I would not take a photo of. Now I'm trying to like get a record shot of everything. And then if something's really cool or cooperative, I'll try and get nice photos of it. But it's really shifted. Like I'm almost trying to do surveys now more than go out to get really nice photos or the best photos I can. And normally like in my day-to-day, I just shoot. Like my son and I and my wife will go on a walk, and I'll just bring my camera and we'll go on a walk for maybe an hour, and I'll just kind of like see what I can find. But I've been really lucky in that last summer, and I've done a little bit of work this year with the BC Parks iNaturalist project, where my job was to do these photographic surveys in parks. And with that, I was actually just going out for like 2 weeks at a time, taking photos from like sunrise past sunset every single day.
Wow.
And so I have been taking photos a lot, like more than I can even edit. Like I'm spending all my time just uploading them to the website. I'm not really editing any new photos anymore. So hopefully once that's done, I can actually edit photos and post photos online again. But yeah, I've been taking a lot of photos lately.
So that experience is much more, probably leans more like documentation rather than art. Like that's what it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you try and fit the art in, like if you find the right subject that's just so cool, or it's just cooperating, you can do that. But I've really shifted my focus to like, I almost find myself having to be like, whoa, you're not done with this yet. Because I'm kind of like, all right, where's the next thing I can take a photo of and document?
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing gallery. Love your work. I'll see if anybody else runs another question in here, but yeah, just so many good things. It looks like you might have do you have a hobby in bicycling?
Yeah, I've mountain biked most of my life, and I picked it up again like 4 years ago or something. And yeah, that's my other hobby. So I'm trying to split my time between photography and mountain biking. And it's tough because I love them both.
Yeah. Yeah. And being a dad.
And being a dad.
Here we go. Let's end on this one. Can you see what's up on the screen?
Yes, that's a year ago when he turned 1.
Yeah. What's his name?
His name's Rupert.
Rupert. All right. I didn't ask you for permission to put your son up there, so I hope you don't mind.
I shared it. I shared that.
I figured it was okay. But yeah, what a good little kid there. All right. So anyway, hey Thomas, I loved this show. Like absolutely. Give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. I love to hear it. Now you can find me on my social media contacts down here at SKeysImages and on my website, skeysimages.com. If you enjoy the content, you're also going to want to check out patreon.com/wildlifeinspired, my subscription site where I take you in the field and behind the scenes, and I offer lots of editing advice in both Lightroom and Photoshop. I also have videos there that are archived only for Patreon subscribers. I do want to thank you for your ongoing support, and I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.